Hi folks, I'm just going to do a quick video to talk you through how to do section B on paper 3. So very quickly, let's just remind ourselves what is on paper 3. Section A, you have a choice of two 12-mark questions. The questions will ask you to examine two different things. So in this case, examine similarities between the G7 and the G20, or examine differences between democratic and autocratic states. And the section A is similar for all of the papers. You can see here we've got examine criticisms of the ICC and UN tribunals and the role and significance of NATO and the UN. Anyway, well, I'm interested in section B today, and I want to show you a few tips on how to do this question well. So section B will always ask you to analyze realist and liberal perspectives on an issue. All right, it's another 12-mark question like section A. You'll spend 15 minutes on section A, you'll spend 15 minutes on section B. That leaves you an hour and a half to do 2 questions of 3 in section C. So section C, they're your 30-mark essays, which you're very used to doing by now. You do 2 out of those 3, any 2. So 3A and 3B, maybe 3A and 3C, maybe 3B and 3C, whichever 2 take your fancy. And you'll spend 45 minutes per question on each of those. That's an hour and a half in total. So anyway, section B, the only question you don't have a choice, but we do know that it's going to be about realist and liberal perspectives on an issue. So this one from 2022 is about realist and liberal perspectives on human nature and power. This is 2021. The question is about realist and liberal perspectives on the impact of both international organizations and the significance of states. We've got another one here, and this one is about realist and liberal perspectives on the security dilemma and the liberal concept of complex interdependence. So, to summarize then, these are general areas where that section B questions might be on. On the right-hand side of the screen here, you can see a realism versus liberalism PDF. This is on Teams. Also on Teams are the past papers that I've just pulled up and shown you. So please go on Teams, go into the Global Politics folder, find that PDF. It will really help you. Also, go into Teams, go into the exam resources folder, and there's past papers in there as well. Familiarise yourself with the paper 3 exam. It is a little bit different to paper 1 and paper 2 in how it's laid out. All right, so anyway, human nature, power, order, security, likelihood of conflict, security dilemma, international organizations, willingness to cooperate, significance of states. These are all general areas that section B questions will be about. So you just need to be ready for that. And you need to just explain how realists and liberals disagree on the issue in the question. Okay, so I've got a few tips to help you with this, and it will help you. First of all, whatever the question is about, it always makes sense to talk about human nature. So first paragraph, write about human nature, because a realist understanding of human nature informs a realist perspective on those things in front of you. You know, realists and liberals disagree about the importance of power because of their disagreement about human nature. Realists are less willing to cooperate than liberals due to human nature, etc. We could do this all day. Realists and liberals disagree on things fundamentally because of a difference in perception about what human nature is. So the first paragraph about human nature is a good way to start. My second tip is, regardless of what the question is about, there's always opportunities to bring in other concepts. So if the question is about power, you can write about human nature, but you can also write about security. You can write about willingness to cooperate, because one of the reasons why realists think that we need to accumulate as much power as possible is because they are unwilling to cooperate, because they feel that cooperation is is an absolute gain. Some people gain from cooperation while other people lose. liberals have a much more optimistic view of cooperation. They think that both sides can gain. So we're talking here about relative gains and absolute gains. So when talking about power, you can talk about security. You can talk about cooperation. You can talk about the significance of states. Because realists think that states are more important than liberals do, that then means that states feel as though they are on their own in this anarchic system. And so they need to accumulate as much power as possible. So in writing about power, you can write about states. So again, those topics to the left, there's plenty of opportunities to make links between the different topics and the specific thing that you've been asked in the question. Okay. Top tips. These are my top tips for section B. First of all, first paragraph, human nature. And within that first paragraph, then you can link in your core thinkers. And as you link in your core thinkers, apply the the realist and liberal understanding of human nature to the thing that the question's been asking about. So if the question is about the likelihood of conflict, you talk about human nature in the context of the likelihood of conflict, for example. And when talking about core thinkers, let's have a look at the mark scheme, and you'll find something amazing. Every mark scheme, there are 5 mark schemes on teams. There's a 2019, a 2020, a 2021, a 2022. There's also a mock mark scheme as well. And they all talk about the same core thinkers in the same way. I've just pulled up 2 mark schemes here, but they are all the same. You can see Hobbes in blue. Hobbes and the consequences of this for the state system and for the likelihood of cooperation, his negative view of human nature, and the dangers to civil society. Every mark scheme says that. Look at the one underneath. Hobbes and the consequences of this for the state system and for the likelihood of cooperation, his negative view of human nature, and the dangers to civil society, and the likelihood of conflict. So they'll just tack that on the end there about the likelihood of conflict, because that's what the question's asking in that particular mark scheme. In yellow, you can see a very similar thing for Locke. Emphasis on the benefits of mutual cooperation from both an economic and practical position, Locke, linked to the limited role of the government, including at a global level. And then the one underneath, emphasis on the benefits of mutual cooperation and order and avoidance of war from both an economic and practical position, Locke. So you can see that all of the mark schemes, and you can check for yourself, all of them talk about Hobbes, all of them talk about Locke. They also put Marx in there as well, although you only need 2 core thinkers, one for realism, one for liberalism. So my recommendation would be stick with Hobbes and Locke. And these are the things that the mark schemes always say about those core thinkers in the context of human nature. So to go back, first paragraph, human nature. Link 2 core thinkers. Why not Hobbes and Locke? They're in the mark scheme, and it says the same thing about them every year. So you can almost learn by rote what your first paragraph is going to be about. The only thing that you have to be careful of is then applying human nature to the thing that the question is asking. You also have to have contemporary thinkers. And at the top, we have some realist contemporary thinkers, and at the bottom, we have some liberals. If you are struggling for contemporary thinkers, stick with Mearsheimer and stick with Robert Cohen. They are the most general of the 2. Mearsheimer, emphasis on the maximization of power. He understands the need to accumulate power in the context of this anarchic system. The system is anarchic, the anarchic society, as Hedley Ball would say. And because the world is anarchic, states cannot depend on a world police to look after them. And so the only person they can depend on is themselves, which is why national interest comes first. Cohen, on the other hand, does not believe in an anarchic system. He believes in what we call a rules-based system. All liberals do. This is not exclusive to Cohen. But a rules-based system is the opposite of an anarchic system. An anarchic system is one where rules cannot really be enforced because there are no structures that can realistically enforce them. Liberals think that that's actually not true, and institutions can enforce this kind of rules-based system, and states do as well because it's in their interest to do so. We live on, on this planet where we have to cooperate because there's no opportunity to escape it. And so while we're here, we need to ensure that the system is as stable and as functional as possible. And so it's within everyone's interests to follow this rules-based system. and institutions are the organizations that enforce this. So we're talking about things like a universal concept of human rights and international law. These all play a part in what we might call a rules-based system. A realist, of course, would say that those concepts are rarely enforced or enforced inconsistently. So Cohen, a complex web of interdependence and a rules-based system, is quite the opposite to Mearsheimer, who believes in the maximization of power, thus less cooperation, and an anarchic system compared to a rules-based one. But you know, if you want to do that, then that would be completely acceptable. You've got Mearsheimer, you've got Cohen. But if you want to make distinctions between the different types of realists, well, we've got Morgenthau. Morgenthau believes that states maximize their power due to human nature. So he's a classical, offensive realist. Human nature is the reason why states behave this way. Whereas people like Kenneth Waltz and Mearsheimer, they think that states behave this way because of the anarchic system. So it's less about human nature and more about the system itself. Waltz is a defensive realist. So he's not a power maximizer. He thinks that states should accumulate power, but power for security. Someone like Mearsheimer, as a maximizer, thinks that states should accumulate as much power as possible. How much power is too much power? No such thing. But Waltz thinks there is such a thing as too much power. And the priority needs to be power for security. If states accumulate too much power, according to Waltz, that will lead other states within the system to group up against that powerful country because they feel vulnerable. States feel vulnerable if there is another state in the system that is way more powerful than them. And that might explain why groups like ASEAN were established in 1967 against the power of the likes of China and other communist states in Southeast Asia at the time. States were grouped together against the interests of others. Graham Allison, most linked to the Thucydides trap, we did see a TED talk on this. And so Graham Allison might come into play if we talk about the likelihood of conflict, because he would argue that a hegemon, a hegemon will feel threatened by an emerging second power, in this case China, and will likely try and provoke a conflict in order to preserve its status as number one. And we can see, for example, maybe in the South China Sea, that that is likely. That there's a conflict about who should own these territorial waters. China have interest in the South China Sea, so too do the United States via the Philippines. This, for Graham Allison, is an example of a potential conflict that is brewing as a consequence of the Thucydides trap. Liberals. Fukuyama. All liberals generally believe the same thing, much like the realists. So, if you do mix these up, I wouldn't worry too much. But if we're being very specific here, Fukuyama emphasizes the importance of liberal democracies in the context of the likelihood of conflict. So, the end of history is largely a kind of a thesis about how, as we move away from the Cold War and the ideological struggles of capitalism and fascism and communism have been settled, we will now enter a phase of a more peaceful, peaceful coexistence globally. And this is linked to the fact that we have more liberal democracies. Cohen, as I've already mentioned, he focuses on this complex web of interdependence. Nye, commonly associated with Cohen, Nye and Cohen have written books together, so they have very similar ideas. The one thing that Nye does do differently with Cohen is Nye talks about the concept of hard, soft, and smart power, and that is also a liberal idea. One of the arguments that Nye makes is that, hard power matters. Realists emphasize the point that hard power matters. But Nye says hard power does matter. Guns and tanks are very persuasive, but soft power matters too. And so Nye emphasizes the importance of soft power as well as hard power. And smart power, of course, is a combination of those two things. And maybe in a globalized world, soft power has become more important. That's not to say it's more important than hard, but it's become more important. You know, the United States, most dominant military in the world, spends more than the next 10 countries combined, has not had absolute successes in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, because while they can remove the Taliban and Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi in Libya, while the United States and NATO can remove those powers, those regimes, the aftermath is challenging. The hearts and the minds of you know, the people who live there, and transforming these countries from an autocracy to a more democratic country have failed. And so we can see that the importance of soft power does play a part in a more global society as we have in the 21st century. Kenichi Ohmae, often associated with kind of business and you know, economic globalization, and Thomas Friedman also very kind of economically focused. He's the one who talks about the golden arches theory, you know, this idea that a country with a McDonald's won't go to war with another country with McDonald's. This is based on this idea that markets are open to foreign investment and you know, the kind of free-flowing capital that exists within a kind of you know, global economic system, means that states that are involved in that global economic system are less likely to go to war with each other. Of course, countries have gone to war with each other that have McDonald's, but the point remains. The golden straitjacket is another of Friedman's ideas, and this is that states are willing to give up some of their sovereignty in order for the economic gains, hence the golden straitjacket. Finally, folks, if I can move on, we have a checklist, and this is the final bit. So in your section B question, 15 minutes, first paragraph, human nature linked to Hobbes and Locke. Look at the Marx scheme. Every year the Marx scheme says the same things about Hobbes and Locke, and apply it to the thing in the question. Also in your answer, make sure you include a contemporary liberal and realist thinker. Okay, Mearsheimer and Cohen, or maybe Morgenthau and Fukuyama. Depends on what the question is asking, but you know, they do broadly say quite similar things. So if you really are struggling, Mearsheimer and Cohen are good ones to go with. Use examples too. So I want a realist and a liberal core thinker. I want a realist and a liberal contemporary thinker. And I want examples. If you're talking about how realists are unwilling to cooperate, talk about how Trump withdrew from the Paris Agreement. Talk about how Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. Talk about how Trump renegotiated NAFTA because he felt that the NAFTA agreement was not serving American interests. And so it's renegotiated, and it's now called the USMCA, the United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement. You can talk about how Putin withdrew from the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, because he doesn't recognize this Western concept of human rights. So they withdrew last September. Realists are skeptical of cooperation, they are skeptical of IGOs, they are skeptical of international agreements. Use examples. If you're talking about how realists think that power is important, talk about how China has doubled its military spending over the last decade. Talk about how the United States spends more than the next 10 countries combined, and how that preserves the American status as #1 in the world, if indeed they are. If you're talking about how liberals like cooperation, talk about how liberals are fond of institutions like the EU and the international courts, the ICC. Use examples all the time. Apply these concepts to global politics. So one last thing, do all 4 things, I beg. Human nature, links to core thinkers, links to contemporary thinkers, realists and liberals, and examples. 3 paragraphs for section B. 1 paragraph is going to be on human nature, another paragraph on the thing that the question is asking, and if you need to, make links to other aspects related to the topic in the question. I hope that's been all right, folks. That is it for me. So I'm going to stop recording. And that's it. Thanks very much. Bye.